Hey, how you doing? It's Clayton here from howtodrawcomics.net, and today we're going to be talking about some comic book industry news. First up, we have got Diamond Comics. We're looking at a Bounding into Comics article here by John F. Trent. The headline really does say it all. Diamond Comics announces they won't be able to pay publishers in full until late August, so now they're not even able to pay what they owe. We're also going to be taking a look at Marvel Comics and the pausing of multiple titles as they weather the storm that is the coronavirus and the economic challenges that it has brought along with it. Then we are going to also talk about Image Comics and the layoffs that are occurring there. And finally, some good news as we take a closer look at Jim Lee and the pieces of art that he has been auctioning off and then donating to the comic book stores, the funds that he receives for those pieces of work. So let's start off with Diamond Comics here. Now, it just seems to be getting worse and worse with Diamond. As you know, they are the main primary comic book distributor within the comic book industry. Without Diamond, we do not have comic books coming, at least in hard copy, from Marvel Comics, from DC Comics, Dark Horse Comics, Valiant, or any other comic book publisher in the mainstream that is out there. Of course, this Diamond's demise does not affect the independent comic book creator-owned scene, doesn't affect Comicsgate comic books from coming out because they've all got their own methods of printing and distribution. But let's get into this. So Diamond Comics announced they won't be able to pay publishers in full until at least August. In an email to comic book publishers, founder, chairman, and CEO of Geppi Family Enterprises, Steve Geppi outlined a plan to pay publishers following their announcement that they would no longer be distributing new comics due to the coronavirus. Now, this is really bad news for these publishers because they're already suffering as well. They are losing tons and tons of money from not being able to distribute and get their titles out there. So, the lifeblood has really been sucked dry here within the mainstream comic book industry, and it's not looking good whatsoever. But it's a tough time for everyone. Nick Diamond cannot really be blamed here for making the calls that they're making because they're in a tough situation. So Diamond Comics' new payment plan. The email shared to social media by Alterna Comics founder Peter Sumati details that Diamond Comics will begin paying publishers and other vendors 25% of what they are owed under their contracts beginning the week of April 6, 2020. Alright, so it's going to be tough. Like, that money is going to just be sucked up so fast. They will then pay, so they will then pay publishers and other vendors 25% of what they are owed each subsequent week for the next 6 weeks. Right? Diamond Comics then details they will begin paying the rest of the amount that was deferred in payments over a 13-week period. So this is, this is a brutal hit for publishers, but Diamond's hands are tied here. It's not looking good. That means publishers and vendors won't see their full payments from Diamond Comics until late August. So that's basically, it's heading toward the end of the year. It's a long way away from now. Here's their full action plan. Beginning this week, the week of April 6th, you will receive 25% of the weekly amount due under your contract terms. Each subsequent week, you will receive a 25% payment of that week's balance due. This reduced payment schedule will continue for 6 weeks, with the remaining 75% due in each of those weeks being deferred following that 6-week period, yada yada yada. This is what Peter Sumati says. An update from Diamond regarding payments to vendors, suppliers. Looks like we need to hunker down for 5 months till payments are received in full, right? No word still on the cancellation or adjustments of prior or future purchase orders or a timetable on receiving new items. So, these guys are angry. The publishers are pissed off right now. But what can Diamond do? Really the comic book industry made its own bed here, and this is just the result of the terrible decisions that have been made along the way, not listening to audiences and, really underestimating the power of making a good quality product that people were actually going to want. The comic book industry could have weathered this. Every other print and press, or most of them at least, have been able to survive and keep on printing. There's still newspapers, there's still magazines out there. So, they could have survived this, I believe. This new plan comes after they had previously announced they would be putting on hold payments to their vendors and publishers, right? So they first said that they weren't releasing anything anymore. They weren't distributing comic books. Then they started laying off employees, and now they're putting payments on hold. Diamond Comics announces leadership pay cuts. Not only does the update detail that they won't be able to pay publishers and vendors in full until at least August, but Geppi details that Diamond Comics leadership is taking pay cuts. Geppi writes, "While we understand that this will have significant impact on everyone and the situation could change, we also recognize that our world is in the midst of an unprecedented crisis and aggressive action is necessary." I feel for what the decisions are that they need to make. In addition to the steps outlined above, our leadership team is accepting a 50% salary cut. That's massive, so they're paying half of what they would be normally receiving. Landlords have agreed to rent deferrals, and various other providers of professional services have agreed to defer their payments. Okay, so that's just brutal. It's not just these publishers that are suffering. Diamond is obviously in dire straits here. Geppi concludes, "Never before have we experienced such a test of our resolve and demonstration of our commitment to each other. Now more than ever, we need to come together in support of one another, knowing that these difficult decisions will allow us to emerge from this trying time and thrive once again." And I know that I'm not alone in hoping that that is the case. Do you think, let me know in the comments below, do you think they're going to make a comeback? Do you think that they can get through this? Yes, they are making a lot of hard decisions right now, but maybe it's the right move, at least for them to be able to survive for the time being. It's pissing a lot of people off, but you gotta do what you've gotta do. Donnie Cates pleas for Hollywood to pay rent for local comic shops. Okay, so this is an interesting one. The comic book publishing industry looks to be in extreme dire straits, as it appears that Diamond might not have been able to pay rent on the buildings given they admit they negotiated deferments on the rent. That it uses to do business due to their decision to shut down shipping. Man, that was confusing to read. It's in such dire straits that Marvel Comics writer Donnie Cates has petitioned Hollywood celebrities to help the industry out. Look, these Hollywood celebrities don't owe shit to anybody. They've done their job. They got paid. They're doing well, right? Well, some of them probably aren't. I got to assume that a lot of TV shows and movies have been cancelled in the current set of circumstances that we're all beholden to. But still, at the same time, I mean, why should they help? That's not how the world works. It's a nice ideal to have that people would help each other out, but they don't owe you anything. Cates wrote on Twitter, "It would be pretty amazing if even one of the actors who became multi-millionaires would give a little something back to help shops and creators who enabled them to have their lives." Just saying. Hashtag just saying. You really have no place to ask for that. They don't owe you anything, Donnie Cates. You're a writer, a high-up writer. You must make a couple $100,000 a year, hopefully. Why aren't you donating some of that salary to these comic book stores and other creators? All right. So it goes on. Less than a year ago, Cates suggested there was nothing wrong with the comic book industry. He says, sincerely, relax, man. I work in the industry and have for a long time. We're doing fine, I promise. People have been saying comics were dying since there have been comics. It's all okay. Look, the thing is that kind of attitude has been exactly what has led to this current circumstance for the comic book industry. However, as Alterna Comics founder Peter Sumati suggests, the comics industry put itself in this position. Indeed it did, Peter Sumati. The comic industry across the board can do better for its readers and creators. No one, not even Alterna, is immune to that criticism. See, this dude was smart. He had hindsight before any of this went down. But knowing that, shouldn't all of us publishers be pushing towards maximizing sales by volume so we can bring cover costs down for readers? Then publishers signed exclusive distribution agreements and decided to turn their back on being proactive and having comics out in the world. They turned their back on readers and creators. Lack of sales volume hurts creators, and it puts a drain on readers. Make something that readers want to buy. It's really, really, really simple. That demographic that the mainstream has been aiming their books at, the LGBT community, the social justice warriors, and what have you, they are not people, a demographic. I have nothing against them. That's fine. Each to their own. Do what you want to do. But they, I will tell you, are not a demographic of people that are going to buy comic books, at least not en masse, like normal, everyday people who are actually, who are geeks, who are nerds, who enjoy comic books are going to do. We don't buy comic books for politics. We buy it for a good story, for fun. We want to be entertained. We don't want propaganda. It's very, very simple. That's why sales simply were not made, and why creators are feeling the strain, and publishers as a whole are also suffering. Okay, regardless of where the blame currently lies for the current struggles of the comic book industry, fellow creator Cully Hammer suggested a DC Comics or Marvel Comics actor adopt a comic book shop and pay their rent for 6 months. The self-entitlement is potent here. Hammer wrote, like if any of the main actors and or directors of the big 2 comics movies adopted a comics retailer and paid rent for 6 months to a year, that would be cool. But again, why would they do that? They don't owe you anything. Hollywood does not care about the comic book industry. They of course they might be making money off of the ideas that the comic book industry has put out. Sure, that's fine. I mean, that's been good for comics in and of itself. If anything, movies and the actors within those movies have helped to sustain the comic book industry up until this point. They've helped to bring more readers on board that might not have taken an interest before. Cates also offered up the idea of fellow comic book creators purchasing art commissions from artists who might be struggling due to Diamond Comics' decision to stop shipping new comic books. And I'll just say this here too, not calling anyone out, but if you're a fellow pro who can afford to do this, you should. Even a little $50 to $100 commission can help folks right now. We have to help each other. Come on, man. I can't afford to help everyone, but as all of my titles are still in production, I'd like to help some artists whose books just got postponed. If you are one of these artists and you would like to do a commission for me, DM me or hit me up and let's see what we can do, okay? Honestly, it's a nice thought. I think Donnie Cates really does sometimes have his heart in the right place. He really, really wants to see the comic book industry make it through this. But honestly, it's just the expectations that you have of other people and the demands that you're making are simply unrealistic. You should have made sure that as this storm was approaching, your house was strong enough to stand up against it. Instead, it has completely obliterated the comic book industry, at least for the time being. As to whether or not it can be rebuilt after the storm passes is an entirely different thing. Everybody has got to look out for themselves, not necessarily when the storm has already hit, but before the storm hits. They've got to be able to see it coming in the first place. And there were so many people telling the comic book industry that this storm was indeed coming. There were readers telling them that they don't like what they're putting out. They had the focus group there. They just weren't listening to it. So this is cool, right? Ethan Van Sciver wants to rebuild the comic book industry, and I believe that very possibly himself and many other creators who are a part of Comicsgate and the independent comic book community in general may very well do that. I think that they will be the new face of the emerging comic book industry after the coronavirus and the pandemic which it has caused passes. Cyberfrog creator Ethan Van Sciver believes the current iteration of the comic book industry needs to go away, calling the industry as it currently is as a corrupt and unprofitable system run by people who hated their customers. And they did. They did not give a shit about their customers at all. Instead, some comic book shop owners would exclude readers just due to their political stance if it didn't agree with theirs. I mean, seems to be commercial suicide to me. He then notes that he's working on rebuilding the comic book industry, saying, "You're here at the ground floor." He says it was a corrupt and unprofitable system. Yep, we already went through that. What do you make of Steve Geppe's latest comments? Do you think the comic book industry, as it currently stands, will survive? Well, do you? It's a good question, and in these uncertain times, I don't think very many of us have the answer. It's one thing's for sure, it is not looking good, especially when you begin to look at the other things that are happening right now in the wake of this disastrous economic downfall that the comic book industry has had to go through. So on Newsarama, we have an article here by Chris Arendt, editor. Marvel Comics pausing work and release of 1/3 of its May and June titles. 1/3 is quite a lot. If you want to put that in perspective, it'd be like sharing one-third of your favorite chocolate bar with someone else, right? Like you wouldn't want that to happen. Marvel Entertainment is immediately pausing work on and the release of approximately 1/3 of its May and June comic book issues, a spokesperson confirmed for Newsarama. Marvel's representative said 15 to 20% of its solicited titles would be affected, as some of them are twice monthly in May and June. Brutal. I mean, it's just the fallout, isn't it? It's the fallout of what is going on with Diamond and comic book stores. The decision to pause work on the affected titles, according to the spokesperson, is to help spread the amount of publishing product over the coming weeks and months. Asked when the publisher intends to resume publishing the titles not affected by the pause, the Marvel spokesperson said, "As soon as more information is available, we will outline our longer-term plans." So that's not a good sign. That means that they're still getting their shit together and working out, well, what the hell is our next move? Marvel began telling creators involved with the suspended titles in this decision Friday, and the company spokesperson reassured Newsarama that all talent will be paid for their work to date. But the thing is a lot of these artists and these writers have been told to halt what they are doing, halt their work at Marvel, obviously on these books that have been currently suspended. And so they're out of work now. They'll be paid up to date, sure, but that money's not going to last long. And it seems to me that not only do the comic book publishers in the mainstream industry have any money put away, but also the creators here don't have that many savings either. And it's because they just assumed that they would be able to stay afloat this entire time. They didn't think that they were, in some senses, mortal. They didn't think that they would be able to be destroyed, but and whether or not they will be utterly destroyed is one thing. But they're certainly, they're on their knees now. They're gasping. They're gasping for breath, and whether or not they'll be able to get up after this is a different story. Image Comics is also weathering the blast of the coronavirus and what it has caused economically to happen within the industry. So again, this article written by Chris Arendt, the editor, Image Comics lays off 4 staffers due to coronavirus financial effects. Right now, I love Image Comics, especially back in the day, back in the 90s. I admire what they do, but man, they are, there's no comic book publisher that is being untouched right now, except for those who are within the indie scene, who are within Comicsgate. They're still working away as normal, as they would be without what is happening in the rest of the world at this point in time. Image Comics has laid off 4 staff members as the financial effects of the coronavirus pandemic continue to come to the surface. Image had a staff of 24 prior to these layoffs. So 4 people is, that's pretty hardcore. That means that they're being hit brutally by what's happening. Letting someone go is always tough, but letting good people go due to circumstances like these is even harder. Stevenson tells Newsarama. Cuts become necessary at times like this, though, and with comic shops and bookstores alike being forced to suspend business for an indeterminate amount of time, it's important to plan ahead while that's still an option. They're going to have to innovate. There's got to be something that they're going to have to come up with in order to make sure that they're able to survive this. Digital is the obvious solution here, but the thing is, does the existing reader base want digital, or do they want to be able to hold those comic books in their hands? For me as a comic book reader, there is nothing like having it in your hands. Reading it digitally is just not the same. And not only for that reason would it be a bad decision probably to invest in the digital medium of comic books, but also for the fact that that does not help comic book stores whatsoever. I guess they would just become pop culture stores, if anything, where you would go not to buy comic books, but instead action figures, statues, pop heads, which was probably keeping half of them staying open in the first place. It doesn't make it any easier or less sad, but in order to survive this crisis, we have to make changes in how we do business. Image Comics declined to identify which of their staff members were laid off. However, an Image representative said their roles were the ones hit first and hardest by the lack of new product, shipping, and the suspension of regular office business. Newsarama has independently confirmed one of the laid-off staffers to be graphic designer, production artist Carrie Hall, who had been with the publisher for 3 years. Hall described her own exit on her LinkedIn profile as laid off due to COVID-19, which, it is. Since the publication of this article, Newsarama has also confirmed content manager, copy editor Melissa Gifford was laid off after 3 years with the company. So it's sad. It's very sad news. This is not a happy time. This is not something that is to be celebrated. It is just the way that things are. And it is quite a drab and unfortunate situation that, we're faced with as readers, but also the publishers, Diamond, comic book stores are also having to face and somehow find a way of getting around. But there is some silver lining around this cloud there is some good news here, and I think that this bears shining a spotlight on the wonderful work that Jim Lee and also I believe Rob Liefeld and a couple other comic book pros are doing. So this was written by the Newsarama staff, this article. Big Barter is the newest Jim Lee charity auction sketch. So what Jim Lee is doing is he is auctioning off his work and giving the funds, I believe, to comic book stores who are struggling and possibly other facets of the comic book industry that are in dire straits at this point in time. Newsarama readers get the first look at DC Chief Creative Officer and publisher Jim Lee's latest sketch to benefit the comic book industry charitable foundation, the book industry charitable foundation, BINC, aimed at helping comic book stores and their employees during the coronavirus crisis. And this is fantastic news. We need to see more stuff like this. I don't think alone it is going to save the comic book industry, but it will certainly help in various ways. It will certainly at least put a dent in the unfortunate circumstances that the industry is now facing. The sixth in a daily series that will last 60 days, New Gods character Big Barter is the subject of Lee's latest offering. Barter was chosen by David Mandel, executive producer, director, and showrunner of modern classic TV comedies like Curb Your Enthusiasm, Seinfeld, and Veep. Mandel outbid the competition for the Bizarro sketch, note the Seinfeld connection, and chose Barter. Each auction winner not only gets the original 9x12 sketch, but she or he gets to select the next DC character Lee will draw, so long as it isn't a character he's already sketched. Pretty cool stuff, he's getting people involved, he's getting people engaged with this. It's not just about buying it, it's about, getting people buzzed. The previous 5 sketches, Nightwing, Bizarro, Azrael, Dr. Fate, and The Batman Who Laughs are on pace to raise well over $27,000 combined. That's surprising. I would think it would be more. Combined, that's a big number, but individually, not as much as I would think it would be. All the auctions last 3 days on eBay. Cool. So Bink is a 501 non-profit dedicated to assisting booksellers in need, including comic book sellers. In the past, Bink has offered financial assistance to comic book stores affected by natural disasters and other unexpected financial crises. So, again, this is really, really great. I don't think that smaller fry artists will necessarily be able to raise as much money as Jim Lee or Rob Liefeld, but I think, if the larger, more well-known, who have a gigantic fan base, artists out there are able to do this kind of thing and collectively do so, then maybe they will be able to help out a few comic book stores here and there. It's very hard to say exactly how much it's going to help them out because there's just no telling how long this pandemic is going to swoop the rest of the world. Here in Australia, yes, it has hit to an extent, and we're trying to get over it. But in America, it's not looking good, and other places within the world as well. So it's just a waiting game at this point. And while we wait, figuring out ways in which the comic book industry can survive. I'm still doing my thing. I'm still making my comic book. As are all the other independent creators out there. They're focused on, they haven't put their pencils down. They are still working away on those books. And hopefully the mailing system won't be shut down during the coronavirus, and that we still will be able to get our books out there to our customers. But even that is something. Again, having that foresight is important. that could potentially put a spanner in the works even of independent creators. So we'll just have to wait and see. Let me know what you think in the comments below as to what we've spoken about in this video. Let me know if you liked the video. If you didn't like it, then dislike it if you will. That's fine as well. But until next time, keep on creating, keep on drawing, and I'll see you in the next video.